Welcome back to PrayTell. Here we are again at the National Association of Pastoral Musicians. We're at the National Convention, which began yesterday, or sort of began Sunday with some pre-convention things here in Houston, Texas. So we're here to visit with Msgr Rick Hilgartner. Msgr Hilgartner, I think, although it's Rick, isn't it? We had this conversation before, yeah, and you can just call me Father Ruff. Kidding. Is president of the National Association of Pastoral Musicians. So I want to visit Rick about where you think NPM is at and where it's going. So let me ask you this. I believe this is your third convention since you took the helm, but you sort of came on at the beginning of it's almost 2 years now.
Yes.
So what have the first 2 years been like? What surprises and what have you noticed?
Well, I think the first surprise is how I've managed to barely balance the work of my ministry as a pastor in a parish with NPM. That in itself has been a challenge for me. That my ministry with NPM is, it's a serious position, but it's also part-time, and that's been a challenge. NPM is clearly at a crossroads moment. We have been for some time. And right now, I think what we're experiencing this week is a pleasant surprise, is the cultural crossroads where we find ourselves. For a long time, NPM was kind of had a bit of a stereotype or a bit of an image about what it was about in terms of a liturgical style, if you will, that was somewhat limited in cultural scope. And this is a stretching for us, this particular convention, with real in-depth exploration of cultural diversity. And it's a challenge for a lot of our people. There are some members who've chosen not to come this week because they think it doesn't apply to them. And that's been a struggle, because I think for a lot of people it applies more than they might know. The question of changing cultural landscape in the church, and if one particular minister or music director or pastor's parish hasn't seen that yet, they will. And NPM is perhaps a little late to the game in that regard. There are other organizations, there are other programs that are out there that have been far more accepting of a diverse cultural landscape in terms of language, in terms of styles of music that come from other parts of the world that might be unfamiliar to us. And that's been, I don't think it's been a surprise for me. What's been a surprise is how challenging it's been perceived to be as an issue.
Cultural diversity, of course, in Texas here we're seeing a lot of Hispanic programming, more than I've ever seen at an NPM event.
And there's more to come.
And there's more to come.
Week, it's going to become more and more bilingual.
But the two keynotes have brought in a strong African-American perspective. Was that intentional, or is that just the way the schedule out?
No, I think it was somewhat intentional. I mean, that's the one place the Church in the United States has recognized for several generations now, the cultural diversity. When we talk about that historically, it's been about Anglo and African-American. And NPM has been present in that, though our membership has very much skewed far more Anglo, far more Caucasian. But this year our convention is joined by the Region 10 Unity Explosion Conference, which is an African-American evangelization conference that happens every 2 years. And at Cardinal DiNardo's invitation, that conference is actually taking place within the NPM convention this year. So we were deliberately making sure that our programming that was about cultural diversity had a clear focus not only on the Latino population, because we're here in Texas where that's so strong, but the African-American experience as well.
So we can expect something to change in NPM. I mean, I know that for 5, if not for 10 years, one strategic plan after another said cultural diversity, nothing changed and nothing happened. It sounds like now it really is.
Well, I hope this convention is the start of something that people can see. I said it yesterday in my opening address, not an obstacle or even a challenge, but an opportunity to do something. Our challenge is how do we serve in these parts of the country where this question has already been addressed and people are already doing things perhaps more effectively than we are. So in some ways it has to be about how we as an association can learn from local churches in the Southwest. And I think some of that might be the cause of a perceived lack of interest in NPM's programming and our association at all in some parts of the country where they feel like we don't have anything to offer them. And right now, my message would be they have something to offer us and teach us, especially those of us perhaps on the East Coast who might be just now waking up to some of these questions.
Yeah, or in the Midwest, especially as far north as Minnesota. So changes afoot in NPM. I see other changes as well. There's a holy hour, can you believe it? Eucharistic adoration in the convention hall at NPM. Who would have predicted it? Daily Mass this morning. What's that about?
Well, the second plenary Mass we did last year for the first time, simply as a way to kind of bookend the convention. And historically, there's been one plenum celebration of the Mass as kind of a culminating event. But last year we looked at the possibility of kind of bookending it and basically beginning with the Mass at the early part of the convention, and then the kind of the more solemn convention liturgy later in the week. We had great response to that last year, and so we're continuing that. Next year it's actually going to be part of the opening event. The opening event of the convention will actually be the celebration of Mass in Cincinnati next year. So the Holy Hour came about for two reasons. One, Cardinal DiNardo, as our local host and our Episcopal liaison, talked about it in our planning because the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston uses this hotel for some of their diocesan youth events. And they had mentioned when we were touring the hotel 2 years ago that they had just had a gathering of about 3,000 young people for Eucharistic Holy Hour. And Cardinal DiNardo said, we should do that during the convention. The other reason is that as Eucharistic devotion grows in the church once again, in good ways, especially among young people, more and more of our parishes are asking, with communities in our parishes asking for it. You look at the National Catholic Youth Conference, that there's a Eucharistic devotion in the stadium with 40 or 50,000 young people. So they come home and they want those kinds of experiences in their parishes. We want to be able to model doing that in a good and healthy way, in accord with liturgical norms and liturgical principles. So part of what we're doing tonight, I hope, is modeling an effective way to do this.
But with switched on praise and worship music.
Yes, we are going to be using, the music tonight is going to be led by Curtis Stephen from Oregon Catholic Press, and it's praise and worship music, but it's done in a way that kind of fits the mood of contemplative silent prayer. So it probably won't be as peppy or upbeat, but it's still using a combination of new things that also bring in traditional chant and hymnody, but in a style that's more contemporary. So we're hoping that this can be a tool and a model that people might be able to take back to their parishes.
So let me ask, and I'll ask it just in blog speak and cut right to the chase. Is NPM becoming more Catholic, or is it becoming more diverse, or is it becoming less liberal, or how would you describe the changes afoot? I know those are labels.
Yeah, they're labels. Certainly, I think we're trying to recognize the diversity in the church, culturally, liturgically. I mean, you look around this exhibit hall and you look at what publishers are presenting. And you look at the convention program and all the music. This morning we sang at Mass, we had gospel music, we had traditional hymnody in 4-part harmony with the entire assembly singing in 4-part harmony. We had Gregorian chant, we had some contemporary Spanish music, and it all together, at times flowing in and out of itself, moving from a chanted antiphon into a contemporary Spanish piece and back to the chanted antiphon to kind of to kind of join the whole communion procession together. And that's the state of the church in our parishes, and NPM has to recognize that this is the church. And we don't, as an association, promote one form or style over another.
Let's talk about numbers. I believe the registration at this convention is over what was budgeted for, exceeded the 1,600. And So that's good news. In the organization, membership is stabilizing around 6,000.
It is, yes.
Opening ceremonies, you noted that there are truly more young people than ever. Is that because of strong music in this Texas public school system and its locals, or is it something larger afoot in the organization as a whole?
Something larger afoot in the organization. I mean, eventually, music ministry in our parishes has to be generative. There has to be generativity in that, ministries get passed on to the next generation. So at some point you'd expect that a healthy organization would have that turnover. As senior members retire, they pass the torch on, that there have to be the next generation. I know they talk about it in the American Guild of Organists, that is there a crisis of a lack of interest in students to study organ? We might say that with choir directors in some way. Are young people embracing the arts? Are they doing that? I can't speak to what might be going on in the public schools here in Texas or in education here in Texas, but and nearly 1/3 of our registration is local to Texas, and that's a great sign. Our membership base is smaller here in the South because we haven't been as present. We haven't been as perhaps relevant to the church in the Southwest.
In the Midwest and in the
Historically, we do very well in the Midwest and the Northeast because that's been NPM's kind of the way we've done things. And as I said before, the church in the Southwest is facing different kinds of challenges and opportunities, and we're slowly coming to that now. So I would like to think that some of the youthful presence is simply the generativity of the next generation of church musicians who are coming and looking for the same kinds of resources, but expecting the kinds of resources that work today.
But even within this great news of more young people than ever, and we already saw an increase, I think, last year in Grand Rapids, still, if you look at the fundamentals, the demographics of the organization, a lot more members in their 50s and especially 60s and 70s than their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So NPM used to have some 9,000 members. It's now stabilizing around 6,000. Is it baked in that NPM will be declining and will, be below 5 and then at 3 and then at 2,000?
I certainly hope not. I think as we try and expand our reach by expanding our vision, this is our hope, that we'll be able to kind of gain some more interest and participation from these areas where we've not been as present. We're doing a program in October in Albuquerque in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, a bilingual institute weekend, and that will be offering an entire program in English and Spanish in a small scale. You can find details on our website about that. And it's our hope that we can find other ways to do programming. One of the challenges for us is the whole notion of convention. Today, as budgets are lean in parishes and dioceses and other institutions, it gets harder for people to find the funding or take the time off if they're volunteers who are using their own resources to travel halfway across the country to participate in a 4 or 5 day convention. So one of our questions before us is how do we create other kinds of programming that are more accessible, more affordable when parish budgets are leaner? Our membership base, the pool of potential members is also a little bit smaller today because there are fewer parishes in the United States than there were 10 years ago. With mergings and clusterings and all kinds of other structures, there are simply fewer directors of music because there are fewer parishes that have those positions. The need is still there for formation, for catechesis, but as people are stretched thin, as resources are stretched thin, the ability to come to a 5-day convention and pay airfare and hotel, that gets harder. And we're aware of that, and we're looking at ways to be present, to be effective, to do our mission, to fulfill our mission of formation and fellowship and prayer in itself, because that's part of what we do when we're here. How to do that in other ways that can be more affordable and more accessible at the local level.
Let's talk about the leadership structure and staffing of NPM. I sense one of the challenges is, and you alluded to it in the beginning of your comments, that You are in a parish and you've been hired by NPM as a part of that hiring for a part-time position which could be more than full-time. What is NPM going to do, not just with your position, but staffing in general? There's been some cutbacks at the national level.
Well, I would say at the time that I became president, the staff was still at a level of a membership base twice the size of our association. Our revenue structure, it depends on dues, the convention, and other programs, a little bit on sale of publications, but we're not primarily a publishing house, and donations from our annual fund and other donations, and some advertising revenue for our magazine. So the smaller membership base, the smaller convention participation, meant that the budget, the bottom line was smaller. So we needed to make some big decisions. So when I first came on board, there were 2 retirements that had happened, and those were positions that we simply eliminated after those retirements. And there were 2 other positions that we simply, tragically, sadly, had to cut because we couldn't afford them anymore. So we're operating on a much leaner staff, and that's a challenge because they work hard because members have still the expectations of the services that we provide, and some of those take a lot of hours to do. So we're still, the board and I are still looking at, okay, how do we function effectively without burning our staff out? In some ways, I think it's helpful that I'm also a pastor in a parish. It's keeping me grounded, it keeps me rooted, and it keeps me in touch with our membership. I mean, I'm not a director of music, I'm a pastor, but it keeps me right in the mix of this. And especially with this convention, I'm a pastor of a parish that has a strong and growing Hispanic community. I myself have been challenged. I'm now studying Spanish, and I can get through celebrating the Mass somewhat prayerfully because I think I've learned the words well enough that now I can begin to pray them, and now that I'm beginning to actually learn the language, I'm not just reading it. And the members of the Hispanic community in our parish they're certainly encouraging. They're also very patient with me, and they're happy that I'm trying. But I myself am facing what we're talking about this week, and I'm living it and living with the struggles of it and the challenges of it. So.
Rick, we've talked about NPM growing in terms of ethnic diversity, in terms of outreach to young people and some of their spirituality. I think I'm seeing some growth in the amount of chant, English chant and Latin chant. Do you think there will be growth in the area of organ and traditional music, or will that just remain strong like it always has been strong?
It's always been a strong piece for us. And it's not going to go anywhere. In some ways this week, chant, it's one of the models of doing a liturgy in a culturally diverse context. Because of the historic place of Gregorian chant, it becomes a unifier in some ways. It's everyone's music because it's part of the patrimony of the church. So in some ways, chant becomes one of the things that we can share in common, and chant in Latin in particular becomes one of those things that we all have in common. But the music this week is quite diverse, and it's going to. By the time we get to the convention Eucharist on Friday or on Thursday night, I think the parts of the Mass are all going to be in English and Spanish in a bilingual Mass setting, because by Thursday evening, when the bilingual track starts, the Hispanic presence will be stronger than it is right now, where most of our programming today and tomorrow is primarily in English. We have one of our keynotes is going to actually be a bilingual keynote with simultaneous translation going on Friday and Saturday, which is definitely new for us, figuring out how to do that. But so I think chant becomes one of the things that's part of the cultural diversity landscape, but it's also part of our heritage. We have one of our interest sections is on chant, and a number of workshops today and tomorrow on chant in the liturgy.
Last question. We want you to predict, where will NPM be in 5 years?
I would hope, my vision that I have articulated since I became president, or even since I was being interviewed to be the president, is that NPM would be the organization for church music in the Catholic Church in the United States. And the more we can be open to and supportive of the breadth and depth of musical forms for the celebration of the liturgy in the Church in the United States, the more we might be able to become that. We are the organization that's recognized by the Conference of Bishops in that regard. But it means that we've got to be at the service of the whole Church in the United States. Whether you're in a parish that uses chanted propers and lifts up and cherishes Gregorian chant, or you're a small parish somewhere in the Southwest that's 95% Spanish speaking, we need to find ways to be of service in all those contexts. And some of that means looking at how we pray, how we worship here, what kinds of resources we offer, but it also means we need to learn how to be present and offer resources in an accessible way, not just an expensive convention.
May it be so.
Amen.
Yes. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you for your service to NPM, and thank you for this conversation.
It's an honor to serve.